So hello, my name is Stephen Smith and I'm a staff scientist at Science North. This morning I wanted to talk to you about Science North's garden. This is the second year that Science North has had a garden, and this garden serves many purposes that I wanted to talk to you about today. The first thing that I wanted to share with you though are the types of things that we grow at Science North's garden. So we've got tomatoes, we've got beets, onions, lots of different types of herbs like sage, basil, coriander, parsley, chives. The other things that we have though, we've got carrots, we've got beans, we've got peas, we have all kinds of things, and I wanted to tell you the reasons why we've got the garden at Science North. Okay, so like I said, we've got many purposes for the Science North garden. The very first purpose though is to feed the animals at Science North. You may or may not know that we've got animals on the third floor in our Northern Ecosystems lab. So we've got lots of animals that use food, and reducing our footprint by being able to grow local here and to reduce the amount of times that we have to go shopping is kind of nice. So we've got staff that come out and pick fresh food from the garden for the animals at Science North. The second reason that we've got the Science North garden, of course, is to feed the patrons at Elements Food Court. So you've heard a lot about growing local food and this movement of growing local, and one of the reasons why we've got a garden is that we're able to pick fresh produce daily that's used in the Elements Food Court. So we make things like toppings for pizzas, we make salads or lettuces using tomatoes, onions, cucumbers fresh. We also make a lot of specials like quiche, and we use a lot of the herbs that are chopped and diced up and put in some of the soups that we make. So the third aspect to the community garden is just that. It's a community garden, and when we have excess food like lettuce, which can be cut or harvested 3 times throughout the season, we'll cut it and we'll bag it up and we'll bring it down and we share it at the Blue Door Soup Kitchen in Sudbury. And the fourth and the final reason why we've got a garden, of course, is to do science. And one of my personal favorites and my passion is growing giant pumpkins. This giant pumpkin and giant pumpkins are actually the largest fruit on the planet. And I'll talk more about the giant pumpkins in my next segment. Now, what I wanted to talk about in this segment was growing giant pumpkins and how to grow giant pumpkins, because there is an art and a skill to growing them, and there's a lot of science as well. So the very first thing is that this giant pumpkin is only 30 days old. 30 days ago, it was about the size of a ping pong. So in 30 days, it's grown extremely large. And the reason why is that they have been growing for about 100 years and getting larger and larger and larger. And it's the genetics and the characteristics, the good characteristics that we're looking for, that they're inheriting to get bigger and bigger. Now, this plant was planted back in May, and I germinated it from a seed that was the size of my thumb. So we're looking for lots of leaves on a plant. You want to have about between 500 to 800 leaves on a giant pumpkin plant. Every leaf is responsible for about 2 to 3 pounds of growth in the giant pumpkin over its season. But there's other factors that we're looking for as well, like the weather. This season has been a late spring. It was a very wet spring. We've had no days above 30 degrees Celsius. Giant pumpkins love heat. They love hot, and they grow the best when it's nice and hot, where they're getting lots of water and they're getting lots of nutrients. Now at Science North, we water our garden and we water the giant pumpkins using lake water. So we've got a hose that runs up through a pump, and we use lake water to water the giant pumpkins. So a giant pumpkin plant, like I have in front of me here, this is one plant with one pumpkin, and that's one of the keys, is that you want to grow one pumpkin that can take all the energy and the water and invest it into just that one pumpkin. They take on about 45 gallons of water a day when they're growing in their prime. So they can take up to 45 gallons a day, and that's one of the key factors of growing giant pumpkins that people don't realize. They take a lot of water, and they also take a lot of nutrients. Now, the garden at Science North is an organic garden, so we don't use commercial fertilizers, we don't use insecticides. So what we're doing is I'm feeding this with organic-based fertilizers. So I have something called Meeker's Mix, which is a fish emulsion. It's a granular form, and it's taken from the fish remains during the processing and then ground down where wood is added, and then they bag it up and they sell it. And this is what this guy eats. The thing about giant pumpkins is that they grow quite rapidly. And in the season, there's a lot of work to make sure that I'm going to get the biggest pumpkin possible. So vine management is really, really important. There's a primary vine that is the main part of the plant that grows, and then off of the primary vine there are secondary vines. And off of secondary vines, of course, there are tertiary vines. Now, we don't want the tertiary vines. We want to make sure that we nip those off so that we're investing as much energy as possible into the main part of the plant, the primary and the secondaries. And then each of the leaf structures, which I'd mentioned is responsible for 2 to 3 pounds of weight, each of these surface areas is responsible for the sun to be able to hit the surface and photosynthesize, or go through a process of photosynthesis that creates the energy. It's sort of like the food factory of the giant pumpkin. And that's where it gets its nutrients from the sun. Now, I had talked about the importance of managing the vine. I talked about the primary vine and the secondary and the tertiary vines, and how the plant takes in all that energy and then focuses that energy on the giant pumpkin. But one of the other key factors, especially this time of the year, but it can happen earlier in the season, we're into September now, it's a cool day outside today, is controlling diseases. And one of the ones that the cucurbit family, that's the family that includes the melons. So the pumpkins, the watermelons, the zucchini, squash, cucumbers, they're susceptible to something called powdery mildew, which is visible on this leaf structure here. And it's actually fairly systemic now. It's throughout the plant. And one of the things that you want to make sure is that you don't get powdery mildew setting in while the plant's early. What I've learned is that because this plant is mature, it's very healthy, it's got lots of nice new leaf structures, is that at this point in the game, powdery mildew is not really a factor that I have to worry about. But it's a fungus. So there are fungal spores that are growing, and if I'm moving around in the patch and I'm maintaining the vine or I'm watering, I have to make sure that I'm doing it in a fairly gentle way so as not to cause this fungus or these spores to transfer over the leaves. So that's what really key is, to make sure that I'm controlling the diseases. There's other things like bacterial wilt, and that's caused by the striped cucumber beetle, which has a bacteria in its gut. It's a tiny little beetle. It gets its name striped cucumber beetle because it has black and yellow stripes along the back of its wing structure, its hard structure. And the striped cucumber beetle, the bacteria comes from its frass or from its excrement. So when it's pooping on the plant, it can actually transfer the bacteria. The other way it does it is through its chewing part. So as it's chewing on the leaf structure or the stem, it can transfer that bacteria inside its gut to the plant, and in no time at all, it can wipe an entire plant out. So it's September now, and a lot of people want to know, including myself, how much this giant pumpkin weighs. And we don't have a scale out here, so then how do you do it? And there's a method called the OTT method, which stands for over the top. And it's taking 3 measurements using a tape measure. And this has been adopted by the Giant Pumpkin Commonwealth. It's used internationally around the world as a standard way of measuring giant pumpkins, because I don't have a scale here that I can just lift this thing up. It weighs too much. So how I do it then is I take 3 measurements. I'm looking for the circumference parallel to the ground. So parallel to the ground, I'm going to measure the circumference around this giant pumpkin. And then I'm going to do a side-to-side measurement, which is straight down the side of the giant pumpkin, up and over top, and then straight down, back down to the ground. And then the third and the final measurement is an end-to-end measurement. And so I'm starting at the ground, I'm going up and across the bloom end here, over the center of the giant pumpkin, and down, passing past the stem of the giant pumpkin and straight down to the ground. So those 3 measurements, the circumference parallel to the ground, side to side, and end to end, are then added up. I'm going to add all 3 of my measurements up, and then I'm going to apply that number on a table, or actually, I love technology, so I'm going to use my iPad, and there's an app where I can add the 3 measurements up in the app, and the app will calculate the measurement of weight of this giant pumpkin. So let's find out how much this giant pumpkin weighs. Okay, so we're ready to enter the information in then. So I have this app that I use. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the information that we just collected, and you'll see that I can have the side-to-side, end-to-end, and circumference measurement. So I'm going to enter the data in there. And then, of course, the date that I recorded it, because it's important to know that today, September the 11th, I've done a recording. So we had side-to-side measurement was 68 inches. The end-to-end measurement was also 68 inches. And then the circumference measurement was 8 feet, was 96 inches. What we're going to do is we're going to add up the measurements. And that gives me a bunch of information. It tells me that the previous day, it was 65 inches, so it's grown 3 inches overnight on the side-to-side measurement. It's also grown 2 inches on the end-to-end measurement. It's now 68. Yesterday it was 66. And yesterday it was 95 inches in circumference, and today it's 96 inches. So this giant pumpkin, today the weight is 282.28 pounds. So it's almost it's closing in on the 300-pound mark. Yesterday it was 261.67 pounds. Today it's 282.28, which is a difference of 20.61 pounds. So actually this giant pumpkin has grown over 20 pounds in the last 24 hours, which is pretty remarkable. And of course I'm smiling because if you're a giant pumpkin grower, that's a really good thing. So we've got a giant pumpkin even in this cold weather. Now I have been covering these up at night, which is a little trick as well. So cover them up, keep them warm, and you can keep them growing. So as you can see, there's a lot of art and science to growing giant pumpkins. And if you're interested in learning more about giant pumpkins, I would encourage you to visit my I Love Giant Pumpkins Facebook page by either just going on into Google and you can just Google I Love Giant Pumpkins, or if you're on Facebook, you can just look for I Love Giant Pumpkins and you can follow me throughout the season. This season will be ending shortly, but it'll kick back up in the spring. And the other cool thing is you can see all kinds of images and video and how I use technology particularly to be able to look at how these things grow daily through a lot of cool time-lapse videos that I create as well. So scientists use tools to be able to do their daily jobs, and it's no different with growing giant pumpkins. I can use tools to be able to calculate very definitively things. One thing that I'll mention is that giant pumpkins grow more at night, which is pretty amazing, and I've been able to see that using my time-lapse videos. So I would encourage you to look up the I Love Giant Pumpkins Facebook page to learn more about these and more about some of the other giant pumpkins that I'm growing, particularly the ones at home that are even bigger than this guy.